welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over the flower, which is a topic in the CSEC biology syllabus. If you're interested, go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe. And let's get into talking about the flower. So here we have a diagram of the flower, and it's very important that you know the different parts and also know their function. And so in this small presentation, we'll be going through it one by one, each part of the flower, and basically learning the function of these different parts and why it's important, basically. Right, so everybody pass flowers, like we pass plants outside, and some of them have flowers on them, right? And just for overall purposes, you know that these flowers they attract insects, so you know that insect pollination takes place and all that stuff. So each part of the flower does play a role in reproduction. And as we're speaking about the flower, this is where sexual reproduction takes place. So that's kind of what we're um, really going to be discussing in this video right now. And then you will see, as I get into it, you will realize that on the flower, there are both female organs slash parts and also male organs slash parts on the flower. So we're going to talk about those. Just to keep this presentation a little bit more structured, I have the nodes or the um, structure or basically the function of each part of the flower right here. So we're going to go through them one by one. So the first one with the petals is that they attract pollinators basically with its scent. So let me just go back on here. So this is the petal. This right here is the petal that you see, and so they attract pollinators. So as I was saying before that, you know, like um, bees like the flowers, yes, for their scent, and also petals are usually very pretty. They usually have really bright colors like blue, pink, red that attract these pollinators that help to basically facilitate sexual reproduction in transferring the cali get in the pollen transferred basically. So now these insects, for example, like our bees, they get nectar from our flowers, so they are able to. It's basically like it's a mutual agreement basically. It would be kind of like a little mutualistic agreement where you know these insects, these pollinators, they transfer the pollen and they also get nectar in return. So these flowers, they do attract pollinators, and you know, there's insect pollination. There can also be wind pollination as well. So yeah, and obviously seed dispersal and all those things are also a part in biology. But basically, so that's the petal right there. It attracts pollinators, so that's its primary role right there. Now, before we get deep into it on this side, right here, these are essentially the female reproductive structures of the flower. And then over here are the male reproductive structures of the flower. So basically, the anther and the filament, they make up the stamen, and then the stigma, style, and ovary are what makes up the purple. So essentially, the pollen is going to be coming from the male, and the goal is basically to fertilize the female reproductive structures. So we need the pollen to get into the stigma, down the style, and into the ovary for fertilization to take place. Right? And when that fertilization takes place, you know that the ovary is what is going to become the fruit, and then the ovules inside are going to become the seeds. So that's what we're talking about. That's basically just like a little rundown of what's going to happen. So, as I said before, to keep it structured, we have the sepal. So, It protects the flower bud before it opens. So here is the sepal right here. So essentially, when the flower was still closed up, when it was a young flower, these petals were closed up, and then the sepal would be what would cover it from the outside, essentially. Then the stamen, reproductive part that produces the pollen, and then anther produces and releases the pollen grains, and the filament holds the anther up for effective pollen transfer. So we said before that these three are part of the male reproductive structures, right? So they essentially are what the goal is to get the pollen grain from the male and into the female structure in order for fertilization to take place. And so, with our filament, is holding up the anther, right? And the anther is going to release the pollen grain, and basically, this is where wind pollination would come into play because in order to get the pollen grain from the male to the female or also to another female flower, if we're talking cross pollination to another flower, to the female structure and another flower, we need insect pollination and also we need wind pollination to take place for that to happen. So basically, it's all the supporting. So filament supports it, the pollen grain is produced, both of them make up what the stamen is. It's the male reproductive. It's like a collective name for the male reproductive area right here. And the goal is to fertilize the female and get that pollen grain in the stigma down the style to the ovary. Fertilization takes place, and then we're going to have the ovary turn into the fruit, and then the seeds are essentially would be formed from the ovules, and that's how you get a fruit forming. So once you see a plant that has flowers, there is fruit. You can get fruit from that plant essentially. And then we have the carpel, also called the pistil, female reproductive part of the flower, stigma, sticky surface that receives pollen. So the role that the stigma plays in facilitating pollination and thus overall fertilization occurring is that when these pollen grains are getting transferred, the stigma has to be sticky. It has to be able to catch these pollen grains because if it's being pollinated by insect, let's just say bees pitch on the anther, and then it's going to fly and it's going to stop on the stigma. The stigma needs to be able to hold that pollen grain so that it can get inside to the style and down to the ovary. And even if it's wind pollination, where the wind is what's blowing the pollen to the female reproductive structures, the stigma has to catch it basically. And so that is why it has to be sticky in order to catch the pollen grains. And that is like its specialized structure to allow it to facilitate reproduction. So, and again, as I said before at the beginning, this is essentially sexual reproduction occurring because it's including both male and female reproductive structures. And then the style, we said the style connects the stigma to the ovary, and as I said before, it's basically just the tube, right? And it's basically the tube area, so it connects it to the ovary and allows the pollen tube growth. Ovary contains ovules that will eventually develop into fruit after fertilization, and then these ovules are going to become seeds after fertilization. So as I said before, if you see a flower, if you see a plant that has a flower on it, just know that a fruit. Because what happens with fertilization is that once fertilization takes place, these petals, all of this are going to fall apart. The petals are going to just fall. Um, the surrounding structures are going to fall, and what you're on the stem will remain, and you'll have the fruit. So the petals and everything will fall apart, and then this will become the fruit. So let's just say if this was like maybe an apple or something, this would become the apple, and the ovule that's inside, that would become the seed, essentially. So once you see a plant that has flowers, just know that fruit can come from that. And the receptacle, which is the base that holds all the flower parts together, and then the stem also supports the plants and transports water and nutrients. So basically, these down here just serve as supporting structures for the flower. But essentially, the flower is relatively very simple. In CSEC biology, you just need to know its function and just understand that once you see a question about flower, we're talking about sexual reproduction taking place. It's important that you remember that the stigma, style, and ovary are are female reproductive structures. They are what they're just the female reproductive structures, and in the anther filament, they are the male reproductive structures. Remember that the collective name for anther and filament is a stamen. So once you hear stamen, think male reproductive part of the plant. Once you hear carpel or pistil, think about the female reproductive structures of the flower, basically. Right, receptacle stem, those are the supporting the flower up. Sepal is what was enclosing the flower from the floor, essentially. Right? So basically, just to make this more organized, I'm going to show you guys this is the function on the screen. So you can screenshot it if you want to screenshot it right now. Petal, sepal, stamen, anther, filament, carpel, stigma. You can screenshot it if you want quickly. And then we have the style, ovary receptacle, and then we have the stem, also known as the pesticil, just for you to know more than one name. In case if you're going to exam and it asks about the pedicel and you don't think, oh, I don't know what that is. Right? So essentially this is the flower for CSEC biology. If you need notes or my CSEC biology bundle, go ahead and email me at tonyashley@gmail.com, and there is section A, section B, and section C of the CSEC biology syllabus slash notes. You can go ahead and email me in order to get those. But anyways, guys, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And just that's it. This is CSEC biology the flower. Anyway, just like, comment, share, and subscribe.